What's up guys, Fake Skater here, and welcome to another Unmatched Bronze Strategy Guide. And what do you mean I don't look like Zero Skater? Got the tank top and everything. The hair? What do you mean I look like baked goods? I already stole his video intro. What does he look, what does Zero Skater look like? Baked... Oh, how does he... How does he do that? Hey, hope you enjoyed the intro. You know, if you skipped it, I totally understand. I skip a lot of intros myself, so no hard feelings. Had a lot of fun doing it. But, you know, in either case, we're here for the Moon Knight Bronze Guide. Got to give a special shout out to Zero Skater for giving his blessing on the intro. Got to give special thanks to Baked Goods, you know, for being the OG and being the original guide creator. And I got to give a special thanks to every single one of you who subscribed or are going to subscribe. Now, who am I and why should I be doing a Moon Knight guide? Well, I'll have you know that I used Moon Knight in Summer Legends. I know that he's got comic books and stuff. You know, he's featured in this meme. Unfortunately, it's not a card. And I managed to get the quarterfinals in the Arsenal preseason. So, gotta say, that's a pretty big deal. And if that doesn't qualify me for doing a Moon Knight guide, I don't know what will. According to Zero Skater's tier list, Moon Knight is in high tier. Does Moon Knight belong in high tier? It's a bit tricky. But, spoiler alert, probably. And the reason for that, or at least the most predominant reason, is because he has 3 characters. Just like Moon Knight, I imagine, at least. So, what's going on here? Well, you start the game as Moon Knight. And at the end of your turn, you change characters / abilities, as well as one card effect will also allow you to change your ability outside of that. You go from Moon Knight to Khonshu to Mr. Knight back to Moon Knight. My goodness, those names are very similar to each other. My apologies if I stumble over them. You share the same health pool, HP, base movement and cards. No need to worry about the Jekyll Hyde problem where you have very specific cards that you can't use because you're the wrong person. No. Every single one of your cards is anybody can technically use them, but there's one outlier. Some are clearly better than the others, but we'll get there. Moon Knight. You start the game as Moon Knight. Sadly, he is the worst. Well, somebody's got to be, and it just so happens to be Moon Knight. You must choose your ability before anything else on your turn. Doesn't really do anything worthwhile to help you win the game. However, your high mobility is great for running away or getting close for the next turn. But keep in mind you don't want to run too far away. Because the best thing about Moon Knight is the fact that he transforms into Khonshu. He's the only form that offers 0 defensive bonuses. And sorry, but when I say form, I mean character / ability. And your sole objective as Moon Knight is to survive. I realize I didn't specify what it was, but it is at the start of your turn, you move up the 2 spaces. And as I previously said, you must choose your ability before anything else on your turn. So if you use your 2 movement at the start of your turn, you can then maneuver and basically go 5 spaces. Or you can think of it as a free maneuver without drawing a card. It's quite versatile. You can either use it to run away or you can use it to get close. It's your choice. But Moon Knight transforms into Khonshu. Khonshu adds +2 to the value of his attack cards. He does not take damage from effects other than combat damage. At the end of your turn, change to your next identity, Mr. Knight. Probably the most stacked ability in the game. Moon Knight would be busted if he could be Khonshu all game. It's a great ability on turn and off turn, because off turn you avoid any direct damage effects. Wily Fighting, 15,000 pounds of muscle, Reckless Lunge, Confirmed Suspicion, Medusa and Ghost Rider's ability. Literally anything that isn't comparing two numbers during combat. On turn, you always deal +2 damage. Or, I should clarify, you have +2 to the value of your attack cards. And a lot of your cards have optional self-damaging effects. So something that says, like, after combat, deal 2 damage to yourself and your opponent. Well, your opponent will take the 2 damage, but you won't. Opponents are not really encouraged to feint against Khonshu, so they may save them for other forms. And even if they do feint Khonshu, they're still going to eat basically the printed card value. Khonshu is literally balanced by the other abilities being not as great. Because you can only be Khonshu give or take a third of the time. I mean, it's going to be higher because of a certain card existing, but in any case, Khonshu is balanced by the other abilities being not as great. A fun fact about this, about the non-combat thing, is exhaustion is non-combat damage. You're exhausted, but Khonshu don't care. You can still move, you won't draw a card, but you won't take any damage. Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight adds +1 to all his defensive values. At the end of your turn, change to your next identity, being Moon Knight. He's boring, but at least you get a +1 value to defense, so it's something. You are more than likely going to be in your opponent's face after Khonshu, so being defensive after is welcome. Your next turn won't be that great because you're going to be Moon Knight. So make sure that on your turn, you plan for that. Don't expect to deal damage as Mr. Knight, just like Moon Knight. Attack for effects. This does mean that you're vulnerable to feints in case your opponent wishes to feint particular cards. They're more than likely going to do it in either Moon Knight or Mr. Knight. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your opponent, but just keep that in mind. Character tier list. Self-explanatory, but Khonshu is definitely S tier, sitting lonely in S tier. I rate Mr. Knight as A tier because he, just like Alice. Like, imagine you were Alice and you hit him with a big thing, big +2 value, and then you immediately turn into small Alice. That's pretty good. You like being small Alice on not your turn. So Mr. Knight fulfills that niche perfectly. And then we got Moon Knight in C tier. Also, I'm going to use the abbreviations as K, Mr., and MK for the respective characters, and their abbreviations are very close. This was a very painful presentation to make. Part of the reason why it took so long. But anyway, I digress. Deck stats. Up to 20 defensive cards. And I say up to 20 with a exclamation point asterisk because some of his defensive options are kind of crap. My man is versatile cities. Lots of options for any situation. Now, Moon Knight only has a total of 2 passes. It's not bad, but it's not great. He has decent card draw. I wouldn't say it's the best. There's only I believe 4 cards that give you somewhat reliable card draw. There's one that does, but it's really terrible. He's a mixed bag in exhaustion. He doesn't have very many passes, but Khonshu negates non-combat damage. A typo there. But it all depends on game state. So he's versatile. You gotta adapt to the situation. If you have the exhaustion end game, keep it in mind and count your cards, how many you've got. Maybe you can draw into 0 cards in your deck when you're Khonshu. Hey, maybe that's exactly what you need to win. It's interesting. Not as good as exhaustion as others, but not as bad as some. Matchups. Um, it's always interesting giving matchups on a newer character simply because he doesn't have too much to go on. Of course, I can look at the ladder, but ladder is kind of restricted in the characters that he can go against because there's only 9 other fighters. But in my opinion, he is well rounded. He will, at a bare minimum, have a fighting chance against everyone. Does that mean he has good matchups all across the board? No, there's some that are probably unfavorable, but I'd say he probably has a 40 to 60 at his worst. He is tempo based, so he can be vulnerable to excessive pressure. Examples of this are Bruce Lee, Bullseye, T-Rex, and Robin, where they have either a lot of card draw, a lot of gain action, or a lot of both. Alternatively, outside of Khonshu, you don't really deal a lot of big hits, so setup characters have time to bolster their setup. For example, Sattler might have a lot of time to set up the insight. Dracula has a lot of time to build up the cards, and might have ways to, do the look into my eyes, get rid of your good stuff, etc. Daredevil. Spoiler alert, in my Summer of Legends match, I lost against Hubris's Daredevil, and maybe I'm just bitter, but Daredevil is stinky. Just drinking some water. Daredevil is not fun to play against. I don't think anybody really likes versing Daredevil, but Daredevil is really good in the exhaustion, and outside of your Khonshu turns, you can't really deal very much damage to him that he can't out-heal. He doesn't have any area of effect damage, or not very much direct damage. What do I mean by this? So there's some cards. The most obvious example is Wily Fighting, where after combat you get to deal 1 damage to every opponent adjacent to you. There are quite a few fighters that have similar effects. We got Thrash by T-Rex. We got Wily Fighting. We've got that one Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I can't remember. It's like Hyde Reigns, something like that, where you place a character and you deal a damage to all adjacent. Forgive me. You also got Jackalope's Horns. That's not really... I guess that's not really area of effect. But the point being is you can't really hit more than a singular target. So if you don't have a Travelers, Travelers being a card that allows you to move through opponents, you'll find it difficult to get in on meat shields. Like if Robin has himself pinned in between two outlaws, you're gonna hit one, then you're gonna maneuver in. Well, the best case scenario is you're gonna hit one, and then you're gonna Travelers in, and then you're gonna try and hit as Khonshu. Other characters like Sun Wukong and Elektra, same deal, although Elektra's probably worse at it. In any case, characters that have a lot of meat shields, or they have a sidekick in general, it might be a little bit more difficult for you to get in. But the one good thing that you have for you, and this applies to all characters that you face, nobody wants to be double attacked by Khonshu, so they will be scared. You can use this to your advantage, and by golly, if you want to have success with Moon Knight, you will use and abuse Khonshu. Now, the first card that we go against, I had a lot of mixed feelings about this card. However, I'm going to say this is one of Moon Knight's best cards. I'm going to put it in A tier across the board. Assuming the card effect, it is a 4-value attack only card. It is called I'm Not Real. After combat, you may change to your next identity. Assuming the effect goes off, it essentially changes your ability twice. Once with the card, another at the end of your turn. So you can kind of think of it as like Moon Knight transitioning to Mr. Knight, Khonshu transitioning to Moon Knight, Mr. Knight transforming into Khonshu. It is one of the 2 highest raw damage cards, which you'll hit with a 6 if you're Khonshu, which is among your biggest attack cards if it gets fainted. It's not the end of the world if it gets fainted. They're still taking 2 to 4 damage. Also, the effect is optional, so you get to choose if you want it. You can move in with Moon Knight, attack, and then transform into Khonshu to attack again. So you take your free movement with Moon Knight, you attack, transform into Khonshu, and then you get to attack again, assuming they don't skirmish away or something. Skirmish or faint. If you use it with Mr. Knight, you get to skip Moon Knight entirely, which I'd say is a pretty good effect in my books. You get 3 of these. You get a lot of opportunities to just manipulate your timings. You get to throw your opponent off because they're expecting you to end your turn as Mr. Knight turning into Moon Knight, but surprise, you're Khonshu, and they're thrown off. What are they going to do? They didn't plan for this. Great card, lots of applications, and it's one of your few attack-only cards. With the other one being Why I Always Win. Khonshu is an A tier, Mr. Knight gets a B tier, Moon Knight gets a B tier. It is a 3-value attack only. During combat, you may boost this attack. Here's the boost parameters. You have 8 singular boosts, 18 2 boosts, and 4 3 boosts. That's the entirety of it. If I could do math right, which my math is correct. This card is usually the most powerful option out of Khonshu, as you can hit for 6, up to 8 with Khonshu. It's good for closing out the game or getting rid of trash cards, which they will be coming up sooner or later. Spoilers. It's a second shot, but you don't really have to use any cards to boost with it, as your 3 boost cards are pretty good. You can use it as a poke. It's fine if it gets fainted, because it's a great card if you get to manage to use the boost to close out the game, or you just throw it out. If they defend with a regroup, great, boost your card. If they defend with a skirmish or whatever, don't boost. If they faint, they take a damage, that's fine. All in all, whenever you attack with this, whatever your opponent defends with, you're probably going to be happy. That's why I rated this card high, a little bit higher for Khonshu, because he could do an insane big 8 attack. Next card is Madness Will Keep You Alive. This card, S tier across the board. It is a scheme that allows you to recover 2 health. If you started your turn in a different space, gain an action. It is a very solid healing card. I mean, it's not quite Little Red's healing card, where they get to heal for, essentially double this. But regardless, this card effectively gives you a 20 HP pool. You can use it to stall or pass, or you can use it to gain tempo by using its gain action. Because if you don't move, it's a pass. If you use it to move, you can use it to maintain your tempo. But be wary of exposing your empty hand. Your opponent will see that you now have 2 less potential options to block and may rush you. Keep this in mind. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have a hand of 5 cards. And this is assuming you use both of them, which would be kind of silly. You have 5 cards in your hand. You maneuver, and then you play Madness Will Keep You Alive, Madness Will Keep You Alive. You now only have... you still have... you have 3 cards in your hand now. Instead of 5, you're down to 3. So if you attack or you maneuver later, your opponent knows that you have less defensive options if you decide to keep up the pressure, because you'll be from 3 down to 2, etc., etc. So your opponent doesn't know that these aren't blocks until you use them. So be wary of exposing your hand if you desire. If you're worried about that, just use your actions to maneuver and draw more cards. It's very versatile. It's whatever you want it to be. Pass, gain momentum, your choice. This is one of your boost 3 cards, but you don't really want to boost with it for this card's effect unless it wins you the game. And, if it gets discarded, whether you'd be silly to discard it willingly. But if it gets randomly discarded, or if you get effects with like insight or anything like that, it's going to be really sad. Travelers of the Night. It is a scheme. Move your fighter up to 4 spaces. They may move through opposing fighters, and you gain an action. With Khonshu, S tier. Mr. Knight, it's a B tier, and Moon Knight, it's a C tier. Oh boy, this is what makes Khonshu scary, because it gives you a lot of movement and action gain. It allows Khonshu to be super aggressive and attack up to 2 times. Mr. Knight and Moon Knight can use it, but you'd only really want to use it to escape pins. It can be great to pierce walls, like if they have if they're on the Yukon Death Loop and they have a minion in front of you and they're behind them, you can pierce that wall, get right through it, and teleports behind you. Nothing personal, kid, and you just smack them hopefully 2 times. I personally really like the artwork on this one. It's simple and effective. There's not much more to say about it. It's a great card. It's one of the cards that makes Khonshu bloody scary. Keep that in mind. If you see your opponent with a low hand count, go in there with Khonshu and tear him a new one. This is also your other boost free. I'd rather use it for the effect if possible. We're all in this together. This is a Khonshu B tier, Mr. Knight S tier, Moon Knight B tier. 3 value, defense only. After combat, if you won the combat, draw a card. It's got Mr. Knight's name all over it because it's going to be a value of 3. Card draw is good to keep up with the tempo, not so good in the exhaustion, but as we previously stated, Moon Knight is not the best in exhaustion, but push comes to shove, he can do it. This card won't help him in it. However, even if you don't win, 3 to 4 block is very solid. Overall, simple card. I like drawing cards personally, so I like the effect. If you don't like it, well, maybe don't use it as Mr. Knight. But in either case, very solid card. I love it. Next card is Fist of Khonshu. Khonshu, A tier. Moon Knight, B tier. Mr. Knight, A tier. Now, it is a versatile 3 value. After combat, if you won the combat, move the opposing fighter up to 4 spaces. It's a solid defense for anybody, but ideally you'd only really attack with Khonshu because you're not going to win any battles of an attack of 3. It is optimal to block with Mr. Knight, as you can then run away and catch up to them with with Moon Knight, or you can use that opportunity to run away even more. It is also good to finish your turn by attacking with Khonshu, as you will likely win if not fainted, and that's good because then your opponent is forced to walk up to you if they want to attack, which is very optimal because you're then going to be Mr. Knight. They're only going to be attacked probably once, very likely only once, unless they have action gain, but only attack once, and you have the defensive bonuses provided by Mr. Knight. But as the effect is okay, using it to survive with Moon Knight is acceptable because people like surviving. I like surviving. I'd rather use this card to defend than to just eat an undefended attack, especially if it's Medusa. Past and present intermingle. A tier across the board. It is a versatile 2 value. During combat, add the boost value of the top card of your discard pile to this card's value. So long as it isn't cancelled, this will always be at least a 3. It's like baby's first penance there. Well, not quite. Anyway, I digress. With the boost spread, it's likely to be a 4, as 2 boost is your most common boost number. Your 3-card boosts can act as a setup for attacks. Like you can play your Travelers into this card, or you can move, play your your healing card, Yeah, as I say right here, your healing card can be used before to bolster your defense or bolster your attack. In any case, you're always going to like this card. It's a very solid card, great for everybody. I was so close to putting it for S tier for anybody. If you ask me, I'd say it's better used for defense because then, if it gets, it's very unlikely to be fainted. But in any case, very versatile card. Use it for attack or defense. I like it better for defense. But in any case, great card. Now that's the part I like. Khonshu S tier, Moon Knight C tier, Mr. Knight A tier. It is a 3 value, versatile, with an after combat of, if you won the combat, you may look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck and discard one of them. Place the other 2 back in any order. Now this is an awesome effect. You want to make this trigger. On attack with Khonshu, you are very likely to win, and even if it gets fainted, you're still dealing 3 damage. I'd be happy with that. On defense with Mr. Knight, with it being a 4 value block, you have a good chance of winning. Not as good, unlikely to get cancelled, because who throws feints out unless you're Invisible Man? But sadly, Moon Knight doesn't really want to play this card unless you have no other option for defense, because you have no tools to win. How many times will he win with this card? Like, maybe if they have a second shot and they don't decide to boost, of course they're going to boost. I can't really think of very many attacks. Swift Strike, I guess, but I don't know. Moon Knight doesn't really want to play this card because the other 2 just use it so much better. And another bonus about this card, you get future hand knowledge, and a discard is stacked. What do I mean by this? Well, obviously, discarding from your opponent's deck does directly help you with exhaustion, but you get to draw the 3 cards and you get to look at them. It doesn't say reveal, it says you may look at them. So you can look at them, you can show your teammate if you're in 2v2, but that's a whole different story. You can show them. Your opponent doesn't know. All they know is that you're discarding a card. That 3 cards is 10% of most people's deck. It could be a great card for them. It could be like a beast form, could be Excalibur, larger than life. It could be, I don't know, Devils of Hell Kitchen. It's a fairly good chance that you're going to see a staple card of theirs, and maybe you just get something boring like a feint. That's another feint that they won't have to use. And you know what the other 2 cards are. You get to put them back in any order, so next time they maneuver, you know what they have. Maybe you know that their next 2 cards are going to be schemes, so you use that to your advantage and you rush in. You just pound them, boom, boom, boom. Even if you're Mr. Knight and you know that their next 2 cards they can't defend with, boom, hit them. You get to use that to your advantage, and it's one of the few cards, I think it's the only ability actually, that allows you to know what your opponent's deck is going to be for a small future. I love this card. Great effect. Chef's Kiss. Use it as Khonshu. A totally sane thing to do. Khonshu, A tier. Moon Knight, D tier. Mr. Knight, C tier. It is a 2 value, versatile. After combat, you may deal 2 damage to both fighters in the combat. This is Khonshu's staple card. Can be used with Khonshu for defense or offense, as if you remember, Khonshu only takes damage during combat. I would argue it's better for defense, as you have better attacks with Khonshu. I'm a little mixed with this statement because they're probably going to attack you with something big. Like if you hit if your opponent uses a larger than life, which is going to be very common with Bigfoot, you're going to eat 4. They're going to eat 2, which I guess is fine. I mean, they won that trade overall. That's also assuming that you're Khonshu. because if you use it with any other ability, any other character, you're both going to heat the two, which is great if that causes you to win the game, or if you have an exceptional HP advantage, that's great. But two values, they're kind of poopy. You don't really want to defend with that unless you have no other option. Mr. Knight, it becomes a 3, which I guess is okay, but you really want to try and use this as Khonshu. And the funny thing about Khonshu is that even if they faint it, they're going to be taking 2 damage anyway. I think Khonshu has better attacks to attack with, but it's a very solid card. You can use it attack or defense, but at the end of the day, just make sure you're using it as Khonshu, because the ability is more or less wasted with the others. Good card. Good enough for us. Funny story about this. A little side tangent. I actually forgot to take a picture of this, so I tried to draw it myself. It didn't work too well because I'm not a good artist, but I managed to find the image online. Can't remember where I found it, but this image is not mine. Khonshu, it's an S tier. Moon Knight, it's an A tier. Mr. Knight is an S tier. It's a versatile 4. After combat, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, take 2 damage. It's tied with the highest raw value in the game. It's great for attacking, but I would almost say it's better to keep as defense. So if you attack with Khonshu, you get to keep any cards. I guess I should say if you attack or defend with Khonshu, you get to keep the cards, or get cards, to keep with tempo. And you just draw 2 cards because you ignore the take damage. Mr. Knight transforms this into a 5 block, which is one of the very rare 5 blocks, because I think Willow has one, Deadpool has one if you count his. I think there's another one. I can't remember, but 5 value blocks are very rare. And Moon Knight is one of the blessed ones to get it. The effect is optional, so you don't have to do it. And just because you take 2 damage doesn't mean it's the end of the world. I think it's better to take 2 damage and potentially get a block card than to not defend. Because if you have no block cards in your hand, do it. As long as it's not giving you exhaustion damage, you need something to defend with. But of course, read the game state and all that. It's great as Khonshu, great as Mr. Knight, even Moon Knight. He uses it to survive. This is a great card overall. One of my favorites in the deck, as noted by the tier list. Almost great to use at any time. Let your insanity guide you. Oh my. This, I've said it in my Ghost Rider video, I'll say it again. Every deck's gotta have a stinker, and oh boy do we have a stinker here. D tier across the board. It is a measly 1 value versatile. After combat, discard the top card of your deck, draw cards equal to that card's boost value. This is literally the worst card in the game. You actually want to get this fainted. If you even attack or defend with this, you want to get this fainted. Like, who thought of this? Who thought of this card? Really? Oh, okay, let's carry on. It does no damage. It's might as well be worthless on defense. It discards a card, and non-optional draw is all around bad, because it's a discarding the top card. You don't even get to choose. That could be one of your staple cards. Like if that's your healing card, yeah, you get to draw 3 cards, but at what cost? You're now 4 cards. Because of this card, you're 4 cards into exhaustion. Now, I know I like card draw, but the cost of discarding a card just to get cards, I don't like that. If you like that, I'm sorry, but I just don't get it. Maybe I'm missing something. I want to be missing something. The only good thing about this is it's fodder for choice discards like Hiss and Slither, or for boosting. The best thing about this card is that you use it to boost to get in with Khonshu. That's such a silly thing to think that a card is only good for boosting, but I guess there's other decks that have that. It's horrible for exhaustion, as I said, but there's a little taps forehead moment here for you. You can't discard the top card of your deck if you have no deck, so keep that in mind, I guess. The best case scenario is to force defense at the very end of the game. I guess I really tried to scrape the bottom of the barrel for this. As a Hail Mary, you can use it to get cards. I don't know. I'm missing this card. I want to like this, but every angle that I look at it, it's low value. It's forced to discard. It's draw equal to boost. There's nothing good about this card. Is this Khonshu here? Is that Khonshu? Come on, Khonshu. You're doing us dirty. I'm sorry. I don't know who this is, but whoever is this puppeteer guy, I don't know. You're doing us dirty. He's got some common cards, namely Feint. A tier across the board, except Mr. Knight has it at S tier simply because it's +1 value. It's essentially just your imagination. I mean, it's great. It's a Feint. Khonshu does get a discount surprise attack, so that's something. You can use that to keep in mind with good effects such as Bewilderment, War King, Control the Demon. There are some cards that have a very good effect that is not immediate. So you can use it into those cards because they have very low value, but their effects are really good. Actually, I should double check to see that War King is not immediately. I sure hope not, because that would be embarrassing. But in any case, Bewilderment, Control the Demon, low cards with good value. Don't use it in a Snake Route. You'll be sad. As always, I think it's probably better to be used as a defense, but if you want to go and try some revolutionary offensive Feint strategies, I'm not your boss. And if you're looking for good video that covers the general uses of Feint, Baked Goods has a great video on everything you'd want to know about Feints. Now, I give 3-tier lists just to summarize it. I did change I'm Not Real because I had a revelation of just how different it is. So there's the tier list for Moon Knight, there's the tier list for Khonshu, and there's the tier list for Mr. Knight. I did have I'm Not Real originally at S and B, but here's the generalized. I'm sorry I had to make it small to fit, but as we can see, the cards themselves kind of reflect how I tiered them initially. Like Khonshu has a lot of S and A's. Mr. Knight has a lot of A's. Well, he has a lot of S's too, but he has a little bit more cards down below. Moon Knight, not so great. He's got a lot more lower class cards. But in any case, closing thoughts. Moon Knight is capable of dealing large amounts of damage in short periods of time, otherwise known as a burst character. You have to think several turns ahead. Well, okay, more than usual. Like, you gotta do that with any character, but with this one, a little bit more so. He's quite vulnerable. He has a lot of defensive cards, but if you're not Moon Knight, there's not a lot of amazing defenses. And, in case you're just a starter or, you never picked up Moon Knight before, here's a basic flowchart. Moon Knight, you want to survive, but stay close. Khonshu, get in and do damage. Mr. Knight, maybe attack once and then flee as far as possible. That's very generalized. That does not count for the game state, whether exhaustion's on the table or who you're facing. That's just a basic flowchart I put together. Now, that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you gained some insight, or maybe just had a few laughs, or laughing at me for making a terrible guide because I underrepresented let your insanity guide you. In any case, let me know what you think. Let me know in the Discord, the YouTube comments. If that's all you're here for, the video is pretty much done. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to hear from you. I will now be discussing some bonus content and some things that I just want to say. So the future of this channel, I do this for fun only. I'm not, at least as of the time of this recording, I'm not going to do anything like Patreon, or I'm not going to monetize this or anything like that. And because I work a full-time job, Monday to Friday, 40-hour work week, etc. Because of that, outside of work and my regular life, there's not going to be a schedule. I actually, fun fact, did Ghost Rider in one day. Surprisingly, like I wrote the presentation, I did the script in my mind, ad-libbed and all that in one day. It was done, rendered one day. This one took me a month because I wasn't as inspired to do it. I had to learn a little bit about Moon Knight, do some deep thoughts on it and whatnot. Hopefully it paid off. There's not going to be any schedule. Like, I'm not going to say expect episode 3 in exactly 2 weeks. No, I'm just doing this in my free time when I feel like doing it. Regarding the intro, if you enjoyed the intro, great. I had a lot of fun doing it. I don't know, it popped in my head that that's what I wanted to do because I so eloquently ripped off Baked Goods, although that one was infinitely easier to do. I'm sorry if the quality was garbage because I had to use my phone for both the video and the audio. That's probably why it sounded a lot different. If you enjoyed it, I'm probably not going to do another one. I did it because I felt inspired. There will be a bonus video if you enjoyed it at the end of this, so make sure you stay tuned. And just the closing thing that I'm going to say is, who would you like to see next? I mean, I did Ghost Rider. I did Ghost Rider. I did Moon Knight now. I mean, I feel like it would be appropriate if I did another Marvel character, but hey, I could maybe see if I could do the T-Rex or something like that. But the only thing I don't want to do is any video that Baked Goods has already done. I think his most recent one is Yananga. So Yananga is off the table. I'm pretty sure he's going to do Achilles next, just a hunch. Who knows? I'm not a scientist. But, I only did Moon Knight. Moon Knight's not my favorite. I like Moon Knight. Not my first choice. But I did Moon Knight because you wanted to see it. And because you guys wanted to see it, here I am. Here I did it. So, yeah, just let me know which one you want to see next. I'm all for it. It gives me opportunity to learn and hopefully get some entertainment out of it. And with that, that's all I've got for you. Enjoy the bonus content.